Okay, well, it's about 1 minute after the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started on our webinar today. If folks join late, that's okay. We'll just see them come in here. And if they do, they can still listen to the recording, which will be on our website. If you missed that, we were chatting about that this will be available to download. It's actually, you'll be able to see it on YouTube even, but you'll link to it from our support guide. So if you're not familiar with our support guide, I just want to show you really quick. Let me take this chat down here so I can see if anybody has questions. I was just saying a little bit ago that this looks like it's going to be kind of a smaller group, which is nice. So really do not hesitate to use that chat to answer any questions that you might have, because I'm sure we won't take the full hour with this training. And I do want to start with just some housekeeping things. We can't hear you. That's not on the webinars. We don't have that capability, but the chat is great if you have a question. And, I'll periodically check that. If I miss your question, I'll make sure before the end of the call, definitely answer everything in there. The other thing to note is this is my training account. So I want to let you know that I'm an administrator on this account. So if you see something that you're like, I don't have access to that, something I'm showing you, it could just be that you need to speak with the administrator in your company, and they can either give you additional access if they need to, or if they need to set something up on your behalf, and then you'd be able to do some testing with the client portal. So to start off, what is the client portal and how do we want to use it? It's really designed mostly for our internal in-house marketing teams. So if you work for a big company or a university, a lot of universities use Workamajig, and a lot of times they'll have a marketing team, and that group will have what we consider clients, and those are the departments that they do work for. So unlike a traditional ad agency where you're going out and getting new business, and all of these are a captured audience of clients, and they need a way to log in and request projects of the team. They may want to even be assigned certain things, but we don't want to have to pay for that user. So sometimes you'll hear a client login, and we kind of use free login. It's the same terminology. Also, I've seen like client/vendor login, because really you can give login capabilities to anyone that you would like, and you won't pay for that seat. So if you have, a lot of times we have a small marketing team at a university, maybe 15 users, but there's 200 free users who have the ability to log in and request a project of that team using Workamajig. So that's the most common use. Now, not to say that an ad agency couldn't also have the desire to maybe give a client a login, because you can see things like estimates, billing, deliverables, if you're familiar with that feature on Workamajig, which is really just a way to view rounds. If you have designed something and you want to send that out for them to approve. And previously, you would have had to have one of these free client logins to log in and interact and say, I approve this or I don't. That is actually no longer the case. So I do think we probably have less free client users at a traditional ad agency, because deliverables and estimate approval can all be handled through email app now. So that is a really nice improvement, because it is a little bit more of a hassle to manage a login, and folks forget their login. And then of course, who do they have to contact? Someone on your team to reset it. So really, if you're just looking for the ability to use that deliverables feature or to approve estimates for a client, all of that can be done through email. So you would not have to use this free client login feature. It is really, really helpful, though, if you're an internal marketing organization, which I imagine a lot of the folks on this call are, and they need the ability to have project request forms that people fill out. And they might also even be assigning work to a client user, to a free user. Now, those free users cannot enter time. So, that's why it's, more geared towards an in-house marketing team, where you wouldn't require time entries. So if you were thinking, well, why do we have all these users? They could just be free users. Well, you don't get the full experience. And I'm going to go ahead and show you with the security rights. We're going to start with setup, and I'm going to show you what all a free user can do. And when I test this, or when I train this to my own clients that are my clients, we do a login, and we show you how you can test it. And we'll talk about that a little bit at the end. So there's some hints and tips I have to share with you that will make it easier for you to test this on your end and kind of see what they're going to see before you launch it and say, oh, hey, log into this, and you're not exactly sure what they're going to see. We don't want that. So I'll show you that in a bit. But we're going to start with setup. And so admin manager system setup, kind of where all that backend setup information is. And we're going to go to security settings. So there's a tab at the top labeled full user rights, and that's what we default to. But there's also something called client rights. And that's the free user client login, client portal, all those, euphemisms for the same thing. And so you can see that if you have to highlight on the left side to really see what rights each group has. So even though this is like the account managers and it says, oh, they have all the client rights, you don't have to set up anything. If it's not a free user security group, you didn't intend it to be for free users, you don't have to do anything on this side. But what you would do is select on the left-hand side that it's the client security group. And some people end up having to have more than one client security group because they want to segmentize or, only have certain clients see some things and certain ones see other things. So if you have a complicated setup like that, no problem at all. We can actually help you with that. So if you just reached out to support@workamajig.com, that would reach your account manager, and we'd be able to walk you through some setup of that. So we won't cover that more complicated setup today, but just know if you're thinking, well, I really need something a little bit more complicated than what she's talking about today, it's probably possible. We just want to have an individual one-on-one conversation with your account manager. They can advise you there. So you can see at the bottom, this is a list of all of the people that are in that security group. And if you're familiar with Workamajig or user, you know that everything is driven by security rights, what you can see, what you can do. And so the client security group, this could say anything. We've made it easy to follow by calling it the client security group, but you want to be on this second tab of the client rights. So you can see here, I've given all of the rights possible to this client security group. And today for our example, we're going to be using Bindi Irwin. So she's right at the top of the list. It's in alphabetical order. And we'll be looking at her login and what she would see and that sort of thing. So I've given her full access, and even in the file rights, I've given her full access. So she can delete files, move, view, just everything. Now that is not required. When you drill into here, it works just like it does with the full user rights, where you could say, well, I really don't want them to be able to delete files. That makes me nervous. Okay, no worries. You would just set that up so that they're not able to do that. Now, other things you might say, well, we don't want them to see the calendar. Whatever you decide here, you can deselect these boxes and that would remove the right. So just know that what we're going to be showing today is everything, but if it seems like too much, you can reduce it through the security rights. Okay, I'm going to navigate away from there, and we're going to talk about actually setting up the free user or the contact in the system. So if you were, thinking, well, where would I set that up? It is under the salesperson dot, and that's because that's where the setup of clients, vendors, and then the associated contacts would live. And the reason it's separate databases is you have to add the contacts in, and then you typically would associate them with a particular client. That would be especially true if you're talking about a traditional ad agency. You wouldn't want somebody at client ABC to be able to see anything for client XYZ. That would not be good. So you would definitely need to pay attention to linking them to the particular client. At our internal marketing groups, who are really the ones that use this feature the most, sometimes they want the flexibility of someone who's a department head being able to maybe see other departments, projects, or something like that. So if you have like a very specific setup that you want to implement, no worries. If you contact us, we'll do a training and we'll really customize the training for what you need. So today is very generic, but it's more about what is out there and what might I want to take advantage of more training on and use. So you all are probably, if you are in the department that would set up a contact, you've probably set up a contact before. So we're not actually going to walk through setting up contacts. We're going to talk about free client logins for existing contacts. And I've made this one that we're going to use today a favorite just by clicking on the gold star if you're familiar with that feature. But that's not necessary. I just did it so we could easily find it for the webinar. And so I'm going to open that record, and then I'm going to note that you can see conversations. If there was a project associated, you could see all of that. But this is all your view. And, as the administrator or as someone who's handling setting it up, this is so everything we're talking about still is the person who is the administrator in Workamajig, their view. In a little bit, we'll show you what the view would be for your free client login, which is the Spendy Irwin record. So if we come up here under the More, you'll see that you have the opportunity to preview the client portal. Now, this is so that you don't have to actually go out to your server URL, which mine is app 12, yours is maybe app 1, app 22. We have a lot of different servers, or you may even be on your own server. So if you recognize your company's name in your URL, that's the same URL that you're going to share with the free user. They're actually going to log in to Workamajig just like you log in to Workamajig. They're going to have a login and a password. And so you might say, well, I just want to kind of see what they're going to look at. I don't want to log out and go through all that. So, can you show me what they look at? So that's something you can do with this preview client portal. So I'm going to click on that and just show you that this, and it wouldn't be anything to the left of this gray bar. This is just kind of overlaying on mine, Marlene Calabrese, on my session. But I will, when we get towards the end of the call, I'll actually log in as Bendy. So you can truly see what it would look like if that person were actually logging in. So, but we're just looking at a preview here, and that allows you to see that they have estimates in here that need to be reviewed. And if you click on this, of course, we can slide the panel out and kind of see what they'd see. My logo wasn't the right size, as you can see there. So, but we're just looking at this as an example. And again, you do not have to have the free client login to do this now. It really can be done just through an email, and the folks click on that email link and they're taken to that same screen to do an approval. So this, we're showing it as an option, but you don't have to use the free client portal login to approve estimates. Same thing for deliverables. It's an option if you want to give out, client login, but they don't have to. They can just be sent the link. And there's a whole hour-long session. In fact, I think there's more than one you can choose from in the webinar section for deliverables. So if you want to learn more about deliverables and that sounds interesting to your team, you have never used it, you can do the webinar there on your own time. Or if you want to contact support@workamajig.com, your trainer will walk you through the full deliverables experience, including, at the end, they'll talk about the client portal there. But since we're only talking like client portal in general today, we're not going to go over deliverables. And then the other thing is project requests. Now, not everyone uses project requests. In fact, I would say it's mostly internal in-house marketing groups and not traditional ad agencies. But I do have some ad agencies that, because they have like long-term business relationships with their clients, and maybe they're even on retainer or something like that, they will give them a project request form that they could fill out. So I'm just going to click in here to show you some options, but you could have multiple request forms based on maybe the type of request it was, because you might ask different questions for a different type of request. So they would come in here, select this, and then they would fill out the information. So I won't take you through that right now. There's a whole training on project requests and building them in the back end, because you design the questions that are asked, and we walk you through that and we help you build those. But just know that this, if you are familiar with the project request process, this is really great for these free users to not only be able to initiate, but to manage project requests that they have out there with you. So if they've submitted project requests, they can see whether they're approved or not. This just shows approved, but you could have submitted, in progress, all kinds of different options here. And that helps the user, the free client portal user, manage the project requests they've submitted to your team. The other thing, if they were truly assigned a task on a project, which they can't add time, but they could be assigned a task to complete. And so there's a little option here to say, show only assign tasks with completed predecessors. In other words, don't show me anything that I couldn't actually work on. This is showing an option of a task. And if they were done working on the task, they'd say done. And then it removes it from their list. So you would then see, if you were looking at a project schedule, that that task was marked 100% complete by the free user. There could be more than one user assigned to a task, as we know, if you're familiar with the project management tool. And so if that was true, then just their part of it would be marked complete, but they are marking their task assignment done right through this client portal. And then there's a list of their active projects they could search if they had many projects listed here. And then you also get a little nice notification, oh, there's a new conversation and there's a new deliverable that you need to review. So it kind of gives you additional information. And then when I log in as Bindi, you'll actually be able to see that she, as a free client login user, has her own little notification bell as well. And she can change her avatar, and there's some things that they can do, including changing their password to something easier for them to remember. So we'll look at that in just a bit. But before we do that, I want to show you some settings options here. They kind of go hand in hand with those security rights we reviewed already, but they're only accessible by someone who has these administrative type rights. So even though this is like a preview of the client portal, this is not something that the free user would be able to do or see. They won't have this little gear icon. And I'll show you that whenever we log into them. You'll see a more clear picture of what they truly, really see. This is really the only thing on the page that wouldn't be visible to them. So we're gonna, that's one reason I pointed out, because you might say, oh, I don't see that gear icon. Well, they wouldn't have the ability to, for instance, change what the company defaults are for a client. That's not something we allow, even if you wanted them to be able to, there's no option to give them that right. So you can see, and it's indicated by the little pencil icon, that some of my groups have something other than the company default. So when I click on clients, I can see, oh, this box is checked, override company settings. That's what's letting me know it's different than the company default. And that might be because you want to further restrict what a free or client user sees. So like you might say, well, I want them to have access to projects, but I don't want them to be able to view the project schedule. Or I don't want them to see the specification sheets that we have in here. Maybe you aren't using deliverables as a feature and you don't want to confuse them by allowing them to see deliverables. So that's all this really allows you to do, is customize even further beyond the security rights what the client portal security group would see when they log in. There's another option in here that a lot of people don't want budget type information to show if you're talking about an ad agency rather than an internal marketing group. It's common actually for in-house marketing groups, because they sometimes have to manage their budget, even by saying, well, we're going to transfer budget dollars to the marketing team. So that's why we have that option there. But for a traditional ad agency, you probably don't want budget information to show and how much you've billed them. Then there's also campaign details, project request details. So lots of things to look at. Someone who is in more of a traditional ad agency that's given this free client portal ability to their client contact, they might want to show invoice detail information. That's pretty common because that is something that, they're managing the open invoices they have with you. You'd want them to be able to see that perhaps. So those are the options there. Whatever changes you would make, you'd say save, and then they'd be changed for that client group. So that's additional rights over and above the security rights we already covered. So I'm going to pause there just for a moment to see if anybody has any pointed questions or any questions about what we've covered so far. And then we can answer those. And if there aren't too many, then we can move on to actually logging in as Bindi and showing you what that experience looks like for a free user. And I'll give everybody a couple minutes here because sometimes you didn't know the question of any questions was coming. So you have them, but you just need a minute to think. And it's totally fine if we don't have any questions too. We can just keep moving and we'll just end a little earlier. Which is fine. We have a little smaller group here today. Okay. Well, I don't see any questions yet. Still ask them, even if you're still formulating or you're still thinking, send them in here because we'll pause again and I'll read any questions that are in there and we'll answer those. So definitely still ask your question if you'd like, but we're going to log out of this client portal of my login here, so you can see what it looks like to log in as the actual user. Now, you might say, well, I don't understand why you have to log out for that. Why aren't you just going to start another open tab? Because I could do that. But the problem is the rights can get crossed. So sometimes when you log into the same tab, it's browser related and the browser remembers the information. And people will say, wow, I didn't give them all these rights. Why do they have all these rights? And it's because even though it'll say Bindi Irwin up here, it's picking up on your rights. So I always log completely out, or if you don't want to log completely out, you can go into another browser. So like say you had Firefox open as well, you could log into Firefox, and that way you're not going to have any of those rights crossing over. Now, the other thing I recommend when you're trying to test this in your own system is that you want to be able to log in and see it. So you can't really use a real client login because you won't have their password information, and you don't want to put their real email address and have notifications go out to them when you're just trying to test it. So I always say make a fake login, and then for the email address on that fake login, because almost all the notifications come through email, my recommendation would be to use a personal email address that you have access to. If you use your work email address, well, your work email address is already in Workamajig, most likely. If it wasn't, that would be fine. But for most people that are doing this testing, they're a Workamajig user, so their login is their email address. And that's going to cause the problem of not being getting the right information as well, because it's going to think you're logging in as you. So that's just a little tip for testing it. Use a personal email and a fake name, and that we can truly see what people are going to see and go so far as like sending notices and emails and really see what those look like without actually disturbing your true context. So I'm going to show you all a calendar and that kind of thing when we're actually logged in as Bindi. So I'm going to close out of this. And then before I leave, I do want to show you one other thing. So we've just previewed the client portal, but the other option here, contact settings, I want to go in there because I'd pre-set up Bindi. But if you have not set up a contact ever, that it's going to use a free login, you do want to come in here and give them a user ID and a password. And usually the user ID is going to be their email address. That just makes it consistent and easy to manage. And because most of you are probably on a shared server, it makes it unique, which that's important that it's a unique login so you don't get a message saying, oh, that login's already being used. That'll be frustrating. So even though I'm using a very simple one here, this is obviously a fake account, so it's not going to come up that it's already being used. And then when you set their password, it's going to ask you to confirm password. All of this you would be familiar with if you've set up contacts in the past. It's no different. But then, other than the fact that now they could log in if you give them a password. The other thing here is you want to make sure that they're in that client security group that you've already set up. So little chicken and egg there, you want to set up the security group, get the rights, and then you want to assign the security group in the contacts record. The other thing to note and look out for really on this page is this free login box. If this box is not checked, so if somebody were to deselect this and there's a user ID in here, then you get billed for this user. And the reason for that, and this is a whole nother training, which you might be interested in taking or want to contact your support person for more training on, but we have freelancers and a freelance kind of workflow where someone kind of floats between being a contact and a paid user. So that really comes into play there. So you want to make sure, and it's defaulted as being checked free login. So that's the good news. Someone would have to purposely deselect the free login. But if they do that, then you'll get charged for the user. And I know that's not the point. You are trying to set up a client portal, and that would normally be free. So this one already has a password that I've set, so I'm not going to walk through or set that up again, but it's pretty obvious. You just would type it and type it again. Also, you could quickly see like a subscription, and you might be familiar with this from the employee record because we have this as an option there as well, where if you, and I don't even know if everyone uses all of these options, it's not necessary that you would be using them all, but certainly project conversations are very handy to be able to have a record connected to Workamajig of emails back and forth. So if you said, I want them to subscribe to that, that means every time this user is put on the team of a project, that's automatically going to be selected. And when you start a new conversation from the project, and we can show you starting a new conversation once we're logged in as Bindi, but then you would be able to have that automatic subscription. So you wouldn't have to go in and select them each time. That could be good or could be bad. You may want to really be pointedly adding the client and not necessarily just having them on every conversation. So I'd be careful with that as far as, is that really what I want to do? There's always the option to manually add them as you're entering a conversation in Workamajig. And then deliverables, we did talk about they do not have to use this free client portal in order to be added to a deliverable log. Then they just click on a link that's emailed to them and they share whether they approve or disapprove of the current round. So you can do all of that without the client portal. But some people like the client portal for that because it's everything in one place. If they're already logging into the client portal, they might as well manage their deliverables there as well. So this allows you to add them automatically. And if you're not familiar, if you're thinking, well, I really don't know where that is and I don't know much about deliverables, I highly recommend watching that webinar. And if you love it and you think it'd really benefit your team and you're not using it today, definitely reach out and we'll do some complimentary training on that with you one-on-one. Okay. Notifications. I also will just point out you can have some notifications that are sent to free users. Obviously, some of these are not designed to be sent to a free user, like missing time and new opportunities in the system. You would not want your free client user to get that notification. But if there is anything in here that you think would be good for them to have, you could include it. It's very rare for an ad agency to include any of these, but it is more common for an in-house marketing group to want to have someone that's a free user get notification of certain things. So if you have any questions on that and when and what would be best practice and you want to discuss your particular situation with your account manager, that I'd recommend that for setting any notifications. Okay, so I am going to log out as me. And then I'm still on that same app 12. And so I'm going to log in as Bindi. And you can see they just enter their user ID and password just the same as you or I would. Let me move this in case you can see that. And then you can see now we're logged in as Bindi. So this is truly what that free user sees. And you can see that they have their own bell notification. So there's an estimate out there for Bindi to approve. There's a deliverable out there. And if I click on these, it takes me to the area where I can say, oh, I'm just going to approve it or reject it. Or if I say, well, I need to see more of it, I want to learn more about it, that's what it expands it so you can see. And you can even decline or approve right from here. This show more option lets you make a comment. So you might say, I approve, but blah, 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 whatever they need to say there. So that's kind of a neat feature that they can do that right from here. Same thing with deliverables. If I look at that deliverable that Bindy's on, you can see, oh, here's what she needs to approve and say that she likes it or doesn't like it. We won't go into how all of this works with making a decision and comments, and there's editing tools because that's the deliverables training. But just know this is where they would come if they weren't interested in just clicking through an email link. You don't have to have this to use that feature. And then there's just some unread system messages even. So you could click on that and see different system messages. If you don't want them to be able to see that, that's a security right. So you would just remove that security right in the back end when you're setting up the client security group. But you can see this looks very similar to what we were looking at when we were previewing the client portal through My Login. You don't have that little gear icon that we talked about earlier, but we haven't talked about them seeing the calendar yet. So I want to pay a little more attention to this than we normally do for regular calendar events, because I've added a calendar for Bindi that is part of our traffic management typically. And this is really not used very typically for a regular ad agency. This definitely is an in-house marketing thing where you might say, well, the department head wants all of the projects that their team has requested of, the university marketing team. They want to be able to see them all. They want a calendar view of when the different tasks are starting, concepting, concept development, I don't know what else is in here, production, design, fulfillment. So they want to see all of that. Typically, you wouldn't want, if you're a regular ad agency, for your client to be able to see all that, but you might. It's an option if they want to. But definitely, it's common for an in-house one that wants to see this. And the way these got on this calendar is through published calendars and our traffic screens. So we're not training on that today, but if that really interests you and you say, well, I would really like that. We are an in-house marketing team, and we do have department heads who are free users. We don't pay for their login, and they really are missing being able to see something on a calendar. That's a common request we get actually from universities a lot. So if you need that, just reach out to your account manager, and they'll walk you through how you would set that up in your traffic screens to be able to then publish it and control who can see it. So I'm a little more here and under display options, and this is just like your calendar. If you're familiar with the Workamajig calendar, I have selected that they can see that published calendar, the social team. What do we have happening from March? Of course, it's in September, and that's because it just keeps pushing forward. And I probably set this up in March and never completed it, so it's going to keep going. But that's something that you would require different setup. And I just wanted to show you, because a lot of people ask, well, I don't really understand why there's even a calendar option for a free user, because we don't want them to see our internal calendar, for a regular ad agency. And that is true, you don't. But you may want them to have access to those published calendars if you're an in-house. Okay, so I see someone has a question here, so let me answer that. And they want to know, is it possible to whitelist the client portal or change the default color scheme just for the free login users? I can see you're concerned. Am I really log in as this person? Who am I really looking at? If it says Bindi, I want to make sure that, this is really what Bindi would see. The answer is no. You can whitelist that. You could definitely on your server whitelist that URL. But I don't even really think that would be necessary. Really, the way to ensure that when you're testing this, and really it only comes into play when you're testing, the way to ensure that you're truly seeing what they would see is to be completely logged out as yourself, or in another browser. That would be fine too. So either way, then you're really ensuring that you're seeing what they see before you release it to them. This won't be an issue for them at all because they'll only have one login and password. So there won't be any kind of concern like, oh, maybe they can see what I have. That won't happen. But it would only happen to someone who's testing. And that's why sometimes I don't even mention it, but a lot of people right after this call want to test this out. They're excited to use it. And then, we start to get questions like, well, why can't I do this? Or why does it show too much or not enough? So I kind of like to head those off by mentioning it on this call. Thanks, Eddie, for that question. Does anybody else have a question that they can think of off the top of their head about how they would use this feature or questions about the feature? Okay, that's good. That means we probably covered it all. So it also could mean that you just need time. Oh, what about changing the Workamajig logo to our agency logo? Yes, you can do that. We wouldn't typically, you can't do, the person can't do it, Bindi. But if I log out, let me log out as this one, and you would do this the same way that, yeah. Now, I actually, since I'm clicked on this though, I will just share, this is where they would go to add like their avatar image. This is where they could go if they needed to change. They can't change their login because that's an administrator on the Workamajig side in your team that adds login. But if you wanted to direct them to change their password, if they're always like contacting you, I can't remember my password, you could help navigate them to where they could do their own password change. And then this is some, other like things like time zones and things that they may want to set. So they do have that, but they cannot change the logo, and we can change that agency logo. So let me log out as Bindi, and then we will log back in as me, and I'll show you where you would go to do that. Great question. Thinks my password's too simple. That's because it is. Okay, let's close that. All right, so where you would go as the administrator to say, oh, there needs to be a different logo that they would see, or maybe your company's logo. I think that's most common. And that's under system setup. And then a visual appearance here. And let me move this chat so that you can see. So you could change the logo image here. This report logo, that's why I was just testing something. You'd see it's absolutely huge and doesn't fit. That's what displayed when I was doing the estimate, and it just showed the very top of it. So you definitely, this is not the logo change here, it's this one. So, and then if you change, you don't have to call it Workamajig. You could change this and it'll change what displays here. So you can kind of brand this as yours so that they don't say, well, what is Workamajig? I don't recognize that. You could put your own company name there if you wanted to. And then of course, mine has no image, but you can have the standard image, and we have some options. Mountain sun, these are all very generic pictures from the internet of something, a quiet beach, pink flowers. But you say, well, no, we want to actually use our logo. You could do that. So you'd select this, you'd have your logo saved, you'd select it. I'm not going to save a logo here because I don't really have one that's sized correctly. Typically it's 1 inch by 4 inch and 72 DPI. That's what works the best for display purposes. So definitely that's an option. Good question. It's nice to be able to brand. We are mostly marketing and ad agencies, so we like to brand things. Okay, anybody else have any questions that you can think of? Because if not, I am going to go into the help guide and show you some resources that you can use after the call. Lots of times when we're listening to a webinar like this, it's like, oh yes, that all makes sense. And then we go to do it and we're like, maybe it's a couple days later and you're like, oh, I really can't remember where she went. You can listen to, the webinar recording once it's posted again, but sometimes it's easier to just go to a screen that has screenshots and not have to listen to the whole thing again. So I will navigate there now since it doesn't look like we have too many more questions. And I've already gone in, and it's just support.workamajig.com. So if you just type that into any open browser, you'll come to this main menu. It's trying to ask if we're happy today. We're going to close that. And then you just search Client Portal. So 2 words, Client Portal. And then once you search that, the top search here, if you click on that, this is really designed that you can just send this. You could copy this link and send it, especially if it's an internal marketing team. You may not want to do this if it's, truly one of your clients, but if it's an internal partner and you're an in-house marketing team, then you can just send this. And then this is really their training. So you can see it's kind of, the wording is, if you have been given free login access to Workamajig by your administrator, you're allowed to access this, this, and this. Now, some people don't really want to send this because they're like, I actually don't want them to know that they could get access to our projects because I don't want to give them access to our projects. So if you wanted to, you could just use this as like a kind of a guide that you could copy and cut and paste from, and so that you could make something custom to share with your team if it has too many options on here that you don't want to share with them. So totally optional, but we wanted to be able to provide you something so that if you were just giving them free, unfettered client access, that you wouldn't have to create a document to share with them and to train them. So this is meant to be like a training document for someone who's been given that free access. And it's nice because it has some screenshots. It's also a nice thing for you to access when you're trying to test and play with this. If you can't recall, well, what do I do once I, create that client login? But this one doesn't show you like how to create it or any of the back end. This is more like someone who's been given the free access. It only talks about what they would see as a free access user. So that's what we're looking at here. And it's, not a terribly long document, but it goes to the end here. And then, you can see things we were just showing you a bit ago, like how they could add their avatar and that sort of thing. So that is a great document. If you can share that with a client or use it to create as a jumping off place to create your own document. But if you're saying, well, no, I'm the administrator and I'm now ready to set up free client users and I would like some direction on that, that's not this document. So if we go back, we searched Client Portal, what do we have in here? This is just a video kind of explaining what Client Portal is. You could watch that if you'd like, but you've had that training today, so you probably don't need that. But, and so you'll see this like as an agency elective training project requests in Client Portal. Like I said earlier, very few of our ad agencies require that their own clients have to log into something and request a project. That's just atypical. But if you wanted to do that, this walks you through doing that. And then this is really what you would want for like, well, how do I set this up? So set up client login. And if you couldn't remember like where you need to go, it tells you how to get into that security group. There's also, we didn't talk about this, but this is a great reminder that there's a client portal default. Most people that are newer clients to Workamajig, this is set as a client portal default of client security group. We've set that. But if you are a longtime user and you want, the client portal, the security group that should be defaulted to is XYZ. If you've named it something other than client or whatever, then you can go back there and set that. It's not terribly necessary because all it does is default it, but it's nice if you are, doing it frequently. And then this just goes over what we've already covered, like what are those security rights? Can they have file rights? So this is just a nice thing. If you can't remember something that we talked about in this training, this is like a screenshot review of the training that we've already done. So nice to have, and it really walks you through all the different options and kind of explains each one so you have more data to make your decision. That being said, though, never hesitate to reach out to us. We love the opportunity to work one-on-one with our clients and really help them customize what they need out of this particular feature, the client portal. It allows us opportunity to even help you test. Sometimes it's nice to have a second person to test with. So, definitely don't hesitate to let us know if you need further help with it. Okay. Well, I'm going to open it up to more questions now, and we'll hang out here. If you feel like you've gotten all the information you'd like, you can disconnect. If you do have more individual questions, or you want to hang around to see what individual questions others might have, we'll stay on the line for a couple minutes just to make sure everybody's had a chance to ask any questions. And then Like I said, you'll be able to find this in the webinar section. If you've never looked through the webinars in Workamajig, oh yes, thank you, you're very welcome. There's an option in here that's actually videos and webinars on from the main page, and I highly recommend you check that out. The webinars, unfortunately, they're organized by year. We may change this in the future. So you might say, well, I don't know what year you guys did that webinar. You're right. So you have to actually drill into it to see the webinar list, but it's nice because you could play it on, you don't have to watch on this little tiny screen. You could play it in YouTube, so you get a full screen experience. So there's all those options in there. And there's deliverables. And if deliverables is a new concept to your team and you haven't heard about it, I really encourage you to check that out. A lot of my clients came to Workamajig specifically for this feature, and they just love it. So really, really great feature, which you do not have to use the free client portal for. Probably that might be the 10th time I've said that. It's probably enough. And then, things like revenue forecasting, just all kinds of neat things to explore in here if you have never done so. All right. Well, looks like we don't have too many more questions, so I am going to go ahead and sign off. And I really thank everyone for taking time out of their day to come and enjoy this webinar. And definitely, I hope this just increases your interest more in Workamajig, and you feel, comfortable reaching out to your account manager and getting some more training. Thanks, guys.